Hello and welcome to the Why the Mountains podcast with me, your host, Stephen Farley. I was delighted to interview Linda Blakely recently, who travelled to Everest in 2018. Linda hails from my home county of Armagh, although her accent indicates a life spent overseas. Amazingly, even I have to admit that Everest is possibly not Linda's most amazing achievement, having rode solo across the Atlantic in 54 days last year. Linda deservedly received the Outsider Woman of the Year award recently for her efforts, raising over £100,000 for charity through her achievement on the ocean. However, as always, it is Everest that interests me the most. And of course, I began by asking Linda, why the mountains?
Well, actually, as you know, I was born and bred in Northern Ireland, County Armagh, so we have the beautiful Mourne Mountains there. And I went to Lurgan Youth Annex and I did my Duke of Edinburgh there. So there was a lovely couple who dedicated their time, Eunice McNally and her husband, and they would take us kids out in their own time at weekends, up the mountains, tramping around the moorns. They taught us all the skills like how to make a route and put your points in, compass navigation, first aid skills. They taught us all of that, just, because I think introducing kids to the mountains and outdoors and everything was really quite a passion for them. So that inspired me, and just tramping around the Mourne Mountains, getting my Duke of Edinburgh award, that started my love of the mountains from there. Obviously, they got a bit higher. So when I got to 18, I travelled and ventured further afield and went to Mont Blanc and Killy, and then Denali and Aconcagua. And then I started Ironman actually in 2010, and I fell in love with that sport. So my progression in the mountains took a little bit of a stop then, as Ironman sort of took over my life. And then, when Everest, the disaster movie came out in the IMAX cinema, so I went along with my friend Mel, and we're sitting there watching it without those glasses on, and it was like the Everest was sitting in front of me. It was like it brought the mountain to life, and all of a sudden it was back in my head again. And the journey that I'd been on, that I then stopped to do Ironman, I thought, I've got to go back and finish this now. So that was it. As soon as the movie was over, I turned to Mel and I said, Mel, I've got to go to Everest now. And she looked at me like, are you mad? Did you see what we've just seen? So that was it. And from then, I organised a little trip to base camp. And I thought, I'll just go and walk up to base camp and have a little mooch around. And I climbed a couple of 6,000ers, Island Peak and Low Boucher. And that's where I met this guy, an American climber called Bob, on one of these trips, or Bob. And so I came back home from that thinking, I'll do Cho Oyu first, as it's deemed like the easiest of the 8,000ers. So I thought, if I do that first as a warm-up, I'll see how I get on that one before going to Everest. And so that was the plan. And then out of the email, out of the blue, I got this email from Bob saying, I've got a little Nepali team together, not one of the big sort of expedition groups, but he said, I've got these guys and I'm going to go next year. Do you want to come? Just me and you. And I'm like, okay, all plans for Oyu were shelved. And I thought, let's go and do it then. And so we did.
I can understand how the 2015 movie Everest could inspire someone to want to go and climb the mountain, but in equal measure put another person off it entirely. I enjoyed the movie, but having read many books on the 96 Everest disaster, I am not sure which source material it has used closest. I know that John Krakauer was not pleased with the way he was depicted at certain points in the movie, but maybe an analysis of the film is for another episode. The movie certainly helped Linda refocus her mind on climbing the mountain, and as she says, events moved pretty quickly, so fast in fact, that a potential training climb to Cho Oyu, certainly a good idea, was skipped when the opportunity arose to go straight to Everest. But not just Everest, Linda had her sights set on Lhotse as well.
Well, so I thought when I'm halfway up it, you have to go up. Camp 3 is on the Lhotse face. And then from there, you traverse onto Everest, up to Camp 4 in the South Col summit, and no British female had ever done the Everest Lhotse Traverse. And in fact, only 3 women in the world had ever done it. So that piqued my interest. And I thought, well, let's just get a permit and we'll see, when I'm there. I didn't really tell anybody that was the plan. I just thought I'll put that in my back pocket. And I did tell my Sherpa that this is what I wanted to do, the both of them. So, and Bob knew that was the plan as well. He just wanted to do Everest, but I got the permit for both. And that was my plan. Yeah. Why not when you're there, right? We were pretty basic in the fact we did see a lot of differences in, our stuff and tents, and that we didn't have the foam padding that other people's tents had. We just put our thermarests on the ground sheet. So it was a lot colder because there's a lot of ground sheet and the thermarest doesn't cover it all. So it would be cold. But, and they did a lot more kind of sharing, I think, with our tents. The same tents would go up and down the mountain. So quite often we would arrive like at Camp 1, and there's no tents there for us yet. And we'd sit there and wait while we just see other climbers come up and just get straight into their tents. And we'd sort of be waiting for our tents to come from somewhere else. But it worked fine, and it was nice because it worked around us, it was our schedule. Yeah, and it was just the 2 of us, so it was really nice, and the 3 Sherpas, so yeah.
Interesting that Linda chose to go this direction, and not with one of the big operators on the mountain. In fact, the team's approach was something perhaps more comparable to the earlier expeditions mentioned in this series, like Banjo Bannon and his team. Something maybe a little more pure in some people's eyes. However, as with any expedition, big or small, the family at home have to cope with the separation and worry. I asked Linda about this.
Well, I didn't tell my mum. So I just told her that I was going to Nepal for trekking, because she knows I like walking and tramping and hiking and stuff like that. So I thought, if I go and tell my mom that I'm climbing Mount Everest, she'll have kittens. So I thought, and I just need to focus on me. And you know what these Northern Irish moms are like, they worry about everything. And so I thought, I'll be on the mountain worrying about mom at home, worrying about me, and I don't need that. So yeah, I didn't tell her. And what was really funny was when you do rotations, and I could use the phone at base camp, and so I'd be ringing my mom. Bob would be listening and laughing, and my mum would be asking me like, "What's the weather like?" And I'd be like, "It's cold, mom. It's snowing." And I'd say things like, "Oh, we're just going through some villages, and there's no phone reception in the villages, so I won't be able to phone you now for about 10 days, Mom." And she'd be like, "That's all right, you enjoy yourself." So I got away with it till I came back and I was in the papers at home, so I had to confess then. It was really Bob that had it organised, and he had his friend was our base camp manager, Craig Van Hoy. He was American, and he had tied up with the Nepali guys. So it was he had planned it and said, this is, the best way to go, trekking in. And the summit there from the north side is quite tricky. To be honest, I find the summit ridge quite tricky enough. So I believe from the north side it's harder. So I wouldn't fancy that. I quite wanted to see the ice fall, to be honest. I know it's one of the most treacherous parts. The summit ridge and the ice falls, the 2 most treacherous parts of climbing it. And you've got to go through the ice fall like 8 or 10 times on your rotations. But I wanted to see it if I was going all that way. It's really spectacular, though, to see. When you're climbing in amongst the vast ice structures. I remember going through it thinking, if Disney made a movie set for Santa's Grotto, it would look a little bit like this. It's spectacular and beautiful and stunning, and it's very, very cold. But when the sun, so you climb through it in the dark and in the night because you don't want the ice shifting, and you're really cold. But when the sun comes up and you can see it, the daylight coming up further up, and as soon as it hits your face, it's just beautiful. like the ladders in the ice fall. I didn't like them. There was more than I would have liked, to be honest. I don't mind the ones that go vertical, but the ones that go across the huge crevasses, and some of them are doubled into two and three together. I didn't really like those because if you're a man's foot with the crampons on, men's feet are much bigger than women's feet, and so they can fit over two rungs of the ladders. Whereas my foot didn't stretch to two, so I would be balancing with one rung in the middle of my foot, so not quite as stable as the guys gone over it, and it's not for the faint-hearted.
I don't think anybody could accuse Linda of being faint-hearted. Linda's clearly a very fit person, and her exploits go well beyond the mountains. But I asked her about what training she did to prepare specifically for this climb.
I did a lot in the Stairmaster. In fact, by the time I went to the Everest, I wanted to set fire to the Stairmaster in the gym. I hated it that much. I would do 3 times a week, I'd do 3 hours on it, and I'd have a rucksack on my back with a 15-kilo core bag in it. I'd have 1.5 kilos strapped to each ankle, and I would do 3 hours on that. Oh, I did it for about 5 or 6 months. And also weights, like putting weights on a bar on your shoulders with added weights and doing step ups onto the big box, So yeah, a lot of squatting as well, a lot of core work. So a lot in the gym. Yeah. I don't think actually my legs have ever been as strong as they were when I went to the mountain. Yeah. So I had advice from different forums, and then I took what I kind of needed to do to my Ironman coach, and then he sort of said, okay, so he took what I'd gleaned and put it into a little program for me.
Different strokes suit different folks for sure. Many mountaineers I've spoken to would emphasise the need to get out there into the mountains and do what you're training for. But as Linda explains, there is definitely a place for using Stairmasters and the like to fill the gaps. Though if you are an Ironman level athlete like Linda, that will help for sure. Linda also went to a number of peaks as part of her training, including Denali and Aconcagua, a peak I've set my own sights on in a couple of years, as long as my recovery from a hip replacement goes well. Going to the north side of Everest, Linda spent 51 days on the mountain. I asked her how she passed the time.
You kind of lie down a lot and rest, and then they have a dining tent. So you go in, and they have a little heater in there, and you have sort of camaraderie. And it was actually Craig, our base camp manager. It was his birthday. I think it was in between the first and the second rotation, and we had such a lovely evening. The Sherpas brought out some Nepali rum and some beers, and they had made him a cake. So they put on this Sherpa music, and they were all dancing. And also, it was a bit bittersweet, actually, because although it was Craig's birthday and we were celebrating, so Bob actually had a bit of a fall, and he damaged his shoulder. He tried to go on, but he found he couldn't. It wasn't repairing itself. And in the end, he couldn't use the Jumar, so that was no good. So after this, he had to, I think it was on the same rotation, he had to fly back home to America. And this was his last night before he flew off, and I was starting the next rotation the next morning. So it was bittersweet because we were having such a lovely evening with the Sherpas and singing and dancing and having, great merriment with them and enjoying their customs and drinking the Nepali rum as well. But also knowing that was Bob's last night on the mountain. So that was sad because I was losing my tent mate, and we had good crack in the tent. When you're up at Camp 1, Camp 2, you have to have a laugh and a joke, gallows humor, I think they call it. But yeah, so after that night, he had to fly back to America, and he did have to have surgery in the end. So I was on my own from then. But we had a good little team because we were small and we just got on so well together. We would play music, we would tell stories, we'd ask each other about our lives and what had brought us all to that point, and getting to know the Sherpas too, and the guys who are in the kitchen and the porters at base camp. So you just chat and you go and see some of the other teams as well. We got asked because Craig is he's a social butterfly and he's very well known. He's he's a guide on Mount Rainier and I think he's been up at like 700 odd times. So he's very well known in the circle, the mountaineering circle. So he had a lot of friends at base camp and they would invite us over to their gaff for the odd evening. Somebody even had a bit of a cinema going on. So and then we'd come back to our digs, which weren't quite the same level, but a lot of socialising, in the downtime and sleep.
Sounds like great fun for sure. A bit like being on a scout camp or jamboree maybe, but the stakes are so much higher, and the mountain is always there in the background. I asked Linda if she ever let the mountain into her head, and if she had any worries or doubts.
Yeah, so there was one occasion on the mountain when I was actually thinking, am I going to do this? And that was on the very last rotation. So we'd left Camp 2 to go to the Lhotse face and get on the ropes to climb up to Camp 3, then 4, then Summit. And the weather was really, really bad and it was just getting worse. And as I was walking along, I had sort of secretly been crying behind my glacier glasses as the weather was so bad that I couldn't even breathe. It was really difficult. And I was so knackered. My bag was really heavy. And I was actually doubting, am I going to get up the face? And we looked up, me and Angaloo, just the two of us, my Sherpa, and there was a whole group of people who had come back down off the lines. And you couldn't even see any further up the lines because the weather was that bad. But they had got off them and they were turning back. There was an Indian lady who got frostbite. People were moving on the fixed lines so slowly. So that made the decision in my head. Angaloo wanted to go up, and I said to him, I don't feel good in this weather. I don't like it, so I want to go back. And so in the end, he conceded that the weather was actually that atrocious. We would go back to Camp 2. And so when we got back to Camp 2, I felt that's when I sort of started to feel a bit despondent and thinking, is this really going to end in disaster? It could mean the end of the road for me if I don't make better progress tomorrow. And my bag had felt so heavy that when I got in my tent, I emptied it out of virtually everything. And I just thought, pack the bare minimum, because when you're staring down the barrel of the failure gun, you really reconsider what's essential. So I took out my inflatable pillow. I took out my toothpaste. I thought I'll just clean my teeth with the brush. I took out a spare pair of socks and went with one instead of two. I took out a lot of snacks as well, because you can hardly eat anything up there when it's so high. So I know they're all little things. It all added up to quite a few, a bit of difference in weight. And I remember actually looking back on my blog, I wrote at the time, apart from my dad's passing, this rates as one of the worst days of my life. And that night I was filled with dread of, if I were going to set out tomorrow again to go back, and that was the only time that I ever thought there's a possibility I might not make it now. But then the next day we set off and it was fine. The weather had got a lot better, and I was all good then. So it's just the wind was so strong when it takes your breath away. I think my bag was too heavy as well, and I think going back was the right decision to just have another night at Camp 2 before pushing on. It's a big old day from base camp up to Camp 2 as well. And there's a huge that huge, like 30-meter sheer steep sort of drop between you set out from Camp 1 and then very shortly after is when you go up. There's like 3 ladders up there. And then up the Western Combe to Camp 2, just a little bit before the Lhotse face.
It will come as no surprise to listeners of this podcast how difficult climbing Everest is. The south side, the easier side maybe, is still riddled with dangerous spots and moments, any of which can rob a climber of at best their dream of the summit that year, or at worst, their life. Linda was proven to be strong, however, and well prepared, and I asked her, to describe heading off on her attempt at Summit Day.
Yeah, so I literally wrote in my blog, because I was rereading this before and it was interesting to revisit. So this is what I wrote at the time, and this is the night. It's 9 p.m. now, and we start moving about in the tent after lying for hours with thoughts running through my head. Now we start to boil water and have coffee and get ready. It's suddenly very real. I'm so scared I think I could burst into tears. I guess I'm scared of the unknown, what lies ahead, the mental game of can I do it? Can I live with myself if I don't do it? It's so cold and uncomfortable up here. But this is what it's all been for, though. It's all come to this night. 3 months of killing myself in the Stairmaster, a lot of money paid, a lot of mountains climbed over the course of 15 years to get to this one night. And it's all just warm-up exercises for the main event. And now here I am, and I'm terrified. I think to myself, I should feel lucky because I have this opportunity that other people would love to have. I know I will do my best and give it my all. And so there were my thoughts before I set out, because I would tap in the notes section of my phone. So the slower climbers leave from about 8 o'clock, and because I was a fast climber, we left at about 11:30. And it's so amazing. You come out of your tent and it's pitch black, and all you can see is literally the row of head torch lights going up the mountain, and it's amazing. So yeah, we were able to set out quickly, overtaking people. Well, the start actually went quite slowly because stuck behind people until we hit the balcony, and so I was quite cold because I had to move slowly. Stuck behind them. So I had these warmers in my boots, and because it had taken us so long to get to the balcony, the batteries ran out. So I was very, very cold, stamping my feet. I had spare batteries with me, so I was able to change them at the balcony. And from there, we made our way along the ridgeline, and there's a massive drop to the left, and you can actually feel the void. It's a weird experience. You're so aware that there's a vast nothing. You can literally feel it. So I was glad at that point that we were climbing in the dark. And at that stage, we started making better progress. And then daylight starts to creep over as we approach the south summit. And having read quite a bit about Everest, the general feeling is that if you make the south summit, that then you're going to summit. But I didn't allow myself to get carried away. I knew there's a major ridge to get along. And I kept checking myself that my toes felt okay, my fingers felt all right. I was warm enough, I was moving well. And then we got to the Hillary step, and that's a lot of rocks to cramp on over, which is more difficult than tramping in the snow. But it was nowhere near as steep as what it had used to be, because I think it had quite a lot of snow dumped on it, so it wasn't as bad as what it had been before, but it was still a little bit more tricky. So then you get to the summit ridge, and there's drops on either side, and by this stage you can see everything. And I'd sort of prepared myself for the summit ridge, and I'd watched YouTube videos, but nothing is like when you're standing there, and it's like doing an obstacle course, because you've got to do big steps around things, and it's not just straightforward walking. And with the very big drops to both sides, you're going along. It's not quite a knife edge, but when you've got those big boots on, it's very narrow ledge. So yeah, eventually when I got along, scrambled my way along there, and I could find, I thought my breathing going along the summit ridge was quite laboured and like with gasping. I was like, but I thought to myself, I'm panicking a little and I'm just hyperventilating. So that's what I thought it was. And eventually I saw the top. In fact, quite often when you look up, you think it's the top, but it's not. The ridge goes on and on and on. So eventually we did make it to the summit, and there was a little man on the little statue. I don't know if you've heard it. He's like a gold or a bronzy man standing with his finger up. I know he's not there now, and I don't know how he got there or even where he's got. I assume he's been blown off the top of it. But he was there at the top of my year, and I think it was something to do with the king, but I don't know the reason why. But anyway, he's in all my summit photos, so I know I wasn't imagining or hallucinating. So when I got to the top, I was just thinking, I didn't get overexcited or anything because I thought I've got to get back down this ridge. So I summited just before 8 o'clock in the morning. We spent about half an hour on the summit, took some photos, and then I must say the Sherpa guys are really great and lovely, but they don't really know how to take photographs. So some of the summit photos, you'd think I would be standing anywhere. But yeah. So we left there, we went back down, got back to the balcony, which is the first place where you can, as I said, stop and have a rest. And so one of the other Sherpas came down a little bit after me and noticed that my oxygen had run out. So I had no oxygen, and that's suddenly that made sense why I'd been gasping so much on the summit ridge. So he changed the gas over, and I was like, oh, I can breathe again. This is great. So yeah, I actually ran out of oxygen. And then so we got back to the tent. I got back to the tent in the South Col about 20 minutes before Angelou got back, and he just he got in, we made some tea, we chatted about Lhotse then, and I said to him, look, is it a ridge like that? Because I wasn't keen on doing that ridge again. And he goes, no, there's no ridge like that. And I said, is there rocks at the top, like the rocks we had to go? And he's like, no, there's no rocks at the top. So I thought, all right, fine, let's have some tea, let's rest a few hours and let's go. And we won't think about summiting. We're just going to go for a walk and see how far we get. So he's like, okay. So then we rested a few hours, and then it was the normal drill again, up stupid o'clock in the morning, drink a coffee, get suited up, and it's just so cold. We set out, and it's a completely different mountain because you've got the Japanese couloir, so you don't have those drops to look at. So you're actually going up inside the Japanese couloir for what felt like hours and hours and hours. And then I got to the top eventually. Angelou was a bit behind. And when I saw the rocks at the top of Lhotse, I turned down and shouted down, guess what I can see, Mr. There's no rocks at the top. So he got up to where I was and he was laughing. And then as we went towards the rocks, there was a guy sitting there, and he'd been there for like 5 years, absolutely preserved in where he was sitting. I could see the expression on his face. He was just died gasping for air, really. I know now that he's not there now. I know he was taken down. And I think repatriated, but he'd been there for quite some years. And it's very sad because he was literally very close to the top, and the rope over the stones, you have to literally step over his body to continue on. You've got no way of going around because that is the route, and the rope pulls you up that way. So I just sort of patted him on the knee as a little mark of respect to say, oh, it's okay, mate, and sort of went on up. And when I got to the top, it's the top of Lhotse is so steep, you can't stand on it, you just have to lie against the top. So me and Angelou, and he's trying to get Craig, he calls him Crag, on the radio to say, oh, we're at the top of Lhotse. And Craig, I think at base camp, was having a nap, so he wasn't answering. And I leaned back against it and put my arm on the back, and I sort of looked over, and the back was a sheer drop. And I said to him, let's go down now. We'll tell him later we made it to the top. And he's like, no. And he's like, Craig, we're at the top. And eventually Craig answered, and he's like, okay, we're at the top. And he's like, great. And I'm like, okay, now let's go down. So then we went back down to the whole way down to the high camp.
I never tire of hearing Summit Day on Everest described, and Linda does a great job talking us through her successful attempt. But the thought of having to lift yourself again and to go for Lhotse, I can't imagine that. This double success is truly something special and usually only for professional climbers, which makes Linda's achievement all the more astounding and pretty special. 2018 on Everest was a record-breaking year, the most female ascents and male ascents in a single year, to that point anyway, and some really notable ascents, like the first double amputee to summit Everest, a Chinese climber named Jie Boyo, and apologies if I've pronounced that wrong, sincere apologies. I asked Linda if she got the sense that it was a busy year and if that was evident on the ropes.
No, because we had the biggest weather window. We had a 10-day weather window in 2018. And so all the different companies have it all sorted who's going when for the days leading up to the summit, or even like that week. Everyone's talking about the weather window. Everyone's talking about the date you're going to go for it on. So there's quite a big build up, and with so much talk about it, it can make you quite nervous, because it's everyone, all the conversation. That's what it's all about. So they're very well organized who's going to go when. So the year of the crowd in 2019, they only had a 3-day weather window. So that's when they got the big queues. So I have a photo of me at the South Summit, and it's that iconic shot. And there's no one behind me. There's no one there. It was amazing. And also I was able to pass a lot of people from the balcony on the way up, going over the Hillary step and stuff. So I could, it wasn't that crowded by the time I got up there. But having a big weather window, it really helps that. When you've got the same amount of people got squashed into 3 days, then you're going to have like 3 times the amount of people on the same summit there. So it was kind of a good year, yeah. Yeah, so I saw as well, there was a couple of times, there was a Korean, I think I was walking across to the Lhotse face. It was that fateful morning when I turned back, when the weather had been so bad. And when I felt my bag was really heavy, walking from Camp 2 to Camp 3. And when me and Angela were going up, there was 2 Sherpas coming down with a Korean climber in the middle. And he was just out of it. His fingers were all frostbitten, and apparently he had spent the whole night clinging to the ropes on the Lhotse face. And his guide had been with him, like trying to persuade him to go down, and he wouldn't go down. And so he was going to lose all his fingers. They got another guy over there. Between the 2 of them, they got him down off the ropes and walking back. And he was walking like a zombie. It was like, just honestly, his fingers were in hands were such a state. He'd just been clinging on all night, and he wanted to go back up. He was saying, cut the fingers off and he'd go back. His guide was telling us, because we stopped to have a chat to see, look, can we do anything? And his guide was saying, no, he said things like, cut the fingers off and I'll go back. And I think people lose their heads a little bit. So there was a guy who died in Camp 3 with his tent open and his legs just sticking out. And Camp 3 is very small on the Lhotse face. You just have to go past, and it's kind of like it's a bit relative, because life is so basic when you're on the mountain for such a long time that everything becomes really primitive, and it's only about survival. You don't have your luxuries in life around you. So it's just a matter of life and death. So everything becomes just quite black and white, really. I think you lose a little bit of that touch, I think, that we have when we're, not in an extreme condition like that. I think when you're confronted and a little bit surrounded by death, because you see the bodies that have been pushed down the mountain, you see that, the mangled heaps of clothing that have been pushed off the path, and it's just, you kind of have to accept it and just hope that, you look after yourself and each other as much as you can, but you're very aware that death is there.
Above 8,000 metres especially, death is always there. Even in the safest years, the bodies are there to remind everyone of the cost of one mistake, one slip, one unfortunate moment. But yet, Everest and mountaineering at high altitude in general has never been more popular. I asked Linda, had she any advice to give budding mountaineers looking at heading into the higher ranges?
Yeah, so you have to really look after your physical side and the mental side. So as well as training your physical body, and that is so important, that put me in a really good stead. I could climb fast on the mountain and I could keep warm. So I could also overtake on ropes when people had stopped. So I kept moving, and that was important. So the fitness is really important, definitely. But also you got to train your mind, you got to train your head, because there are times when you're going to be scared. There was for me. I don't know about if the guys are ever scared like that, but I certainly was scared of and nervous of what lay ahead, and it's been scared of the unknown. But I think beautiful and brilliant things lie through on the other side of that door of fear. And if you can just get the courage to go through the door and push yourself out of your comfort zone, the things that you can achieve are great. And even if you don't achieve what you set out to achieve, the fact that you've gone away down on the journey is better than actually sitting at home and not doing anything at all.
Good advice. I think sitting at home and not doing anything at all is something that is much scarier for many people than any challenge that might be out there. Linda may have climbed Everest, but she is far from done, having also rowed solo across the Atlantic Ocean, a feat beyond my comprehension really, much more so than Everest. I asked her, what's next?
Yeah, because my mom, when she found out I climbed Everest, she made me promise that I wouldn't climb any more mountains. Now, I don't know if I'll hold that to promise, but then at the time I thought, well, okay, I'll row an ocean. She didn't say anything about rowing an ocean, so we'll do that next. And then I've signed up to do the Marathon des Sables in April. So then it means that I'll have climbed a big mountain, I'll have rowed an ocean, I'll have run a desert, and then I want to do a polar challenge after that as well, because I want to explore and go to, places on the beautiful planet that we live on that most people don't get to see. So I like to do different challenges, but, my heart lies in the mountains. If I'm being honest, it's the most beautiful to me. So I'm not sure I'll keep that promise to my mum, because I'm sure the mountains will claw me back once I've ticked off the Marathon des Sables and ticked off something polar. I'm sure I'll be back on a big mountain.
What an incredible woman. Honestly, just thinking of her achievements is enough to make anyone get up out of the chair and get out there. Life is to be lived, and Linda is surely finding the best way to do that for her. I wish her every success and must thank her for being so generous with her time. A very inspiring Armagh woman. That's it for this episode. We will be back soon with another episode of the Why the Mountains podcast. Until then, as spring arrives and hopefully we get a bit of mountain weather, stay safe and stay cool.